Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. So I'm Cal Raustiala. I'm director of the UCLA Burkle Center for International Relations, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today for our annual lecture honoring UCLA Professor Arnold Harberger. This lecture has gone on for almost 3 decades at this point, and we've had a really stellar cast of people come through over the years, including Jeffrey Sachs, Melinda Gates, Esther Duflo, Carmen Reinhart, Emmanuel Saez. Today, maybe inauspiciously dubbed Liberation Day, we are honored to have join us one of the world's leading economic thinkers, Simon Johnson. I'm going to properly introduce Simon in a moment, but I just want to lay out what's going to happen. So we will begin in a few moments with remarks from Simon. He has a slideshow, of course, followed by a discussion with our colleague, Sebastian Edwards, and then they will open it up to questions from all of you, time permitting. So there's microphones for that, so hopefully that will all work out, and there will be time for discussion amongst all of us. Let me introduce our speaker and our moderator. When I'm done, Simon's going to come directly up, and then Sebastian will join him afterwards. So Simon Johnson is the Ronald Kurtz 1954 Professor of Entrepreneurship at the MIT Sloan School of Management, where he is head of the Global Economics and Management Group. In December, I think as many of you know, he received, along with his colleagues, Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson, the Nobel Prize in Economics for, quote, studies of how institutions are formed and affect prosperity. An extremely important issue at this moment, really always, but especially at a time when I think questions of economic development and even of economic aid itself are under attack. Simon Johnson was previously chief economist and director of the research department at the International Monetary Fund. His most recent book with Daron Acemoglu, which I was planning to hold, there's a copy somewhere in the room, is Power and Progress, or 1,000-Year Struggle Over Technology and Prosperity, which explores the history and economics of major technological transformations, including artificial intelligence. As moderator, I've asked Sebastian Edwards of the Anderson School and of our Burkle Center Faculty Board to play that role. Sebastian is the Henry Ford II chair in international management at the Anderson School and previously chief economist for Latin America and Caribbean region at the World Bank. He is also past president of the Latin American and Caribbean Economic Association. In 2004, Sebastian was appointed to the California Council of Economic Advisors. He's the author of over 200 articles on economics, macroeconomics, economic development, et cetera. I couldn't think of a better person to serve as our interlocutor today. So please join me in welcoming to UCLA, Simon Johnson.
Thanks very much for the kind words of introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to be with you today. It is an auspicious and important day for economic policy. I hope we'll talk about tariffs. Certainly, two of my favorite sources on tariffs are Sebastian Edwards, sitting right here, and Kim Clausing, who's at the back. And I just want to say also what a wonderful moment it is for me to not only be speaking at UCLA, but as Cal already mentioned, I'm the Ronald Kurtz Professor of Entrepreneurship at MIT, and Ron Kurtz's grandson is sitting in the second row with his wife. And I want to say thank you very much to the Kurtz family for their generosity over so many years. My topic is technology and global inequality in the age of AI. And I think the age of AI is definitely upon us. It's pretty fascinating, lots to talk about. And I'm sure many unsettled questions at the beginning and at the end of this conversation. But I want to summarize, and I've got a number of slides. I'll go through them fairly quickly. I'm looking forward to the discussion with Sebastian. I just sort of summarize my main points, or where I think we are, myself and my colleagues, in terms of thinking about the impact of AI. On the one hand, of course, there's a tremendous amount of optimism about the technology and about its impact on productivity. So one view is that you will never have to work again because the bounty will be so enormous that you're basically going to be taken care of. Just relax and let the technology do its thing. On the other hand, of course, there's also pessimism. So the exact opposite, which is, all the good jobs are going to be taken by AI. All that's going to be left is relatively menial tasks, and there's going to be a lot of us competing for those tasks. So wages are going to get driven down. Really extreme views, and I'm super interested to hear what you have to say about this. Our view is that this is important. This is an important, meaningful technology. But if you look out as far as you can, and I'm going to really stretch on this and go out to 10 years, we could push it out maybe to 20 years. I don't think we're looking at a miracle in terms of US productivity. I think AI will happen. AI will be part of how we continue to deliver on, roughly speaking, the same productivity trend we've had in recent decades. I do think that the most conspicuous impact that we will experience, and most people in this room will see probably rather vividly during their working lifetimes, is increasing job market polarization. And I'll talk about what I mean by that, but basically it's people who are well-educated and relatively well-to-do doing even better, people in the middle likely getting squeezed, and people without a lot of education, without a lot of resources getting pushed further down. So that's consequential, and that obviously plays out in terms of politics, both directly in terms of who gets elected and what kind of policies they want to pursue. The main point, though, of our research and on our policy outreach and our various activities at MIT is it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be any which way. Actually, it's a choice. Technology is always a choice, and that's the point of the book that I'll elaborate on. When we come to these moments, when a new technology is being developed, when the engineers and the scientists are having their brilliant ideas, we need to think through as a society, what exactly do we want to adopt? What are the problems that you want technology to solve? And in that context, what kind of jobs are we going to create, and who is going to have those jobs? So the takeaway from today is there are choices to be made. There's a path for technology that is being chosen, and I think all of us here need to get more actively engaged in the decisions around those choices. Now, I was talking recently to a very prominent technology entrepreneur. Okay, it was Sam Altman. And I made the same points to him that I'm making to you. And he said, Simon, relax. We are all going to be gods. Literally, we will be playing with galaxies. Now, I'm not opposed to playing with galaxies, okay, whatever that means. But the question that I'm interested in and what I want to dig into in the next 20 or so minutes is, who gets a good job? And this is work joint with Daron Acemoglu. He and I wrote the book, Power and Progress. And also David Autor, who is our very brilliant colleague at MIT in the economics department, one of the world's leading labor economists. Together, we run a center called the MIT Initiative for the Future of Work, studying the future of work and understanding the future of work. And the work I'm going to show you, the findings I'm showing you today come from that effort. And if you're anything like everyone else I've met since October of last year, you want to know how it was to win the Nobel Prize. If Sebastian asks me, I'll answer you. But I tell you, it comes with a number of wonderful, amazing surprises, like being invited to UCLA, and also pictures like this suddenly appearing on the internet. What is this? Who are these people? What are they trying to say? But I will make a few points about institutions along the way, and hopefully we'll get into that a little bit more when I talk to Sebastian. So the talk is focused on technology. The current research is very much about the future of work, but we try to embed all of our thinking in what we've claimed that we've learned and understood about institutions. Now, I think the first and most fundamental question when you're thinking about a new invention is to understand, where is it being invented? What's the society into which this technology is being born? And one key issue there is inequality and what's happened to inequality. So if you look at the top picture here, this is change in real weekly earnings in the United States for men since the 1960s. It's an index. This is from work done by David and Daron. It's an index that they started at 0 in 1963. So you can see how different people's wages have evolved. And the pattern there, which is, I think, now a very widely accepted fact, is that men who have and had a lot of education, a graduate degree is the top line, they've done well. So stay in school, do as your parents recommended. It turns out that pays off. Bachelor's degrees also fine, not quite as good as graduate degree. If you look at people who only had some college or high school graduates, they've done much less well in terms of wage increases. And a lot of those jobs, of course, got squeezed. So that's the decline of the middle class or pressure on the middle class. And then look at the real wages of high school dropouts that have barely moved since the 1960s. Now that's actually pretty extraordinary. The other industrial countries in this time frame, many of them, most of them, have had similar experiences, but it wasn't always like this. We did have very important long episodes of technological transformation and economic growth in the United States when everybody's wage went up. The rising tide lifts all boats idea. That's not what's happened here. We're coming into AI. AI is being brought to us and being brought to fruition at a time when we're already very unequal. And that matters in a number of ways in terms of who has visions for what the technology can do. Also, where's the market? Where's the money? Who has the spending power? Comes directly off this kind of picture. And the risk and the danger, I think, but it's early, we don't know for sure. But I think what we need to absolutely worry about is that AI is going to exacerbate these polarizing trends, that it's going to further help the people at the top, further squeeze the middle, and push people down at the bottom. Now, you can tell me whether or not that bothers you, and then we need to talk about the politics, and then we need to talk about the policies that come out of it. But I think that's the very real danger. And on top of that, I think it's also obvious, but important to say, there are very real risks for the democracy stemming from the fact that we've already found it difficult to manage information, arguments, deliberation, and politics in the digital age, the digital age that's already been with us for 4 decades. And partly we can talk about how the internet has played out, partly we can talk about the impact of social media. AI could go either way. As I said, there are choices, but I think the danger is it becomes much more problematic. Now, this is a technical slide I'm not going to spend any time on. I will say that all the slides are available, and I want everyone, including but not only students, to look at these slides, to click through into the references of the papers, to think about open questions. There's an enormous amount of research to be done in this field. It's very fruitful research. There's companies to be built, there's papers to be written, there's things to invent, and I'm hoping really just to stir your minds a little bit and push you in this direction. This particular chart is the labor share of income in the United States over a long period of time, back to the 1950s. It's declined a lot. Some people look at this and say, well, it's already declined a lot, so what could happen? What more could go wrong? Perhaps, we're surely going to bottom out. The answer is, unfortunately, to that, the right response, I think, to that assertion is to look at other countries and other parts of the world where the labor share of income is substantially lower than the United States. So the shift from the first picture I showed you was shifts within labor. This is a shift from labor to capital. It's entirely possible that labor will end up with a substantially lower share, capital end up with more as a result of this wave of technology. Now, we're obviously very deeply interested here in economic development and what happens to the rest of the world. And I want to be entirely obvious with you. I don't think we yet see clearly any of the patterns that are emerging in middle-income countries, let alone lower-income countries. We do see some impact of AI in higher-income countries. There are some very good studies I'm going to talk about, but this is a really open issue. Again, the concern is that AI will squeeze the middle because the technology has capabilities that are going to make it much easier to either bring activities back to the United States. Perhaps it's jobs coming back, or perhaps it's people in the United States becoming more productive and therefore not needing to outsource. But I think we're also seeing pressure on, you wouldn't even call them middle-income countries. Lower middle-income countries feel pressed by countries that have even lower wages because those low-wage people can be supported by AI in a way that allows them to take over some tasks and play that kind of role in the global economy. So a lot of the AI is absolutely continuing this digital trend of reducing trade frictions. And obviously, today with Mr. Trump's announcements, you're seeing one set of responses to previous reductions in trade frictions. What happens going forward? Well, let's talk about it. But there's many pressure points, to some extent on the US economy, definitely on the rest of the world. So deepening inequalities, and making local labor markets more unstable and making global politics more unstable, absolutely possible. Now, the Nobel Prize work feeds into this because I think, as Cal already alluded to, if we have strong rule of law, if you have protection of property rights, if people have democratic rights, that's good for economic development and it's good for political stability. Now, that might seem completely trite and obvious. Actually, people argue about that all the time, including in Washington, D.C. right now. But that's what our work was about. And that was the evidence that we mustered in a couple of fairly famous papers and about 25 other papers that you should also read if you're reading our work. We looked in particular at the experience of European colonization, and we looked at what the Europeans did in different parts of the world. And the bottom line there is that in places where the Europeans wanted to encourage other Europeans to come, they built relatively inclusive, means favorable to most people, economic and political institutions. In places where the Europeans didn't want to bring other Europeans, mostly because it was really unhealthy for Europeans due to tropical diseases, malaria and yellow fever will be at the top of that list. And remember, this is all before the age of modern medicine, so there were no effective therapeutics or vaccines or even effective preventive measures. So the Europeans said, well, we can't move to West Africa because if we go there, most of us will die. But that didn't mean they backed off. On the contrary, they found ways to be involved and to establish rules of the game that were favorable to them. They ran the slave trade out of West Africa. They found ways to rule over large parts of India. They ran most of or entire West Indies and had effects on Latin America and many other places. So if you go back through that history and look at what the Europeans did and look at what drove those colonial strategies, you can find an explanation for early institutions being either more inclusive or more extractive. More extractive means it favors just a few people. And that then lets you unpack, at least to some extent, the effect of institutions today, like rule of law, like democracy, on outcomes like GDP per capita. So GDP per capita is not the final story. It's not the only thing that interests you. I started off by talking about inequality, but GDP per capita is the number one benchmark that we use when looking around the country and saying, right, who's got some level of prosperity that can be shared on a reasonable basis. And again, if you look at these slides afterwards, you can see a rather simple graphical presentation of our results. You click through for the papers, and you can have more detail. The interesting thing about the development of these institutions and the colonial experience is there were enormous transformations of many economies during the 19th century, including the United States. The United States in the 1700s was an agrarian place. And in the mid of the 1800s, it was still not regarded as at all developed or a leading edge in terms of engineering and industry. By 1890, the US had become the leading industrial power in the world. And other countries that started out with relatively advantageous economic circumstances, such as India, fell behind. The pattern of that distribution of income in the 19th century, what was established by 1900 is largely what we live with today. So there was relatively little change. Average income per capita rose, but the relative distribution of income did not change much in the 20th century. And this is more on that reversal of fortune. So what is it that we want to get from AI? We want to get what we got with the railroads. We want to have expanded opportunities. We want to have an opening up of new tasks for people. We want to have productive work for people who don't have a lot of education to start with. We want to enhance human capabilities irrespective of initial education levels. Now, I'm not saying that industrialization was easy, and I'm not saying some people weren't harmed, because they absolutely were harmed. But if you think about when the development of new technology went well, what happened when the US auto industry was built. In 1900, when Henry Ford started to work in Detroit, the US car industry employed about 30,000 people making 40,000 cars. In 1929, Ford and GM alone made 3 million cars, and the auto industry employed 400,000 people, most of them doing tasks that humans had never done before. And that's the kind of transformation that boosts real wage, raises productivity of people without a lot of education, that makes it possible to get higher wages. But I have to emphasize that trade unions were a very important part of building the middle class and arguing and pressing and forcing the people who owned these factories to pay wages that were affordable because productivity had gone up by so much, but they weren't going to pay them without the union pressure. And we can talk about what happened, and maybe we will talk about what happened to wages around the world and the ways in which some countries, such as Japan, have figured out how to harness technology and create shared prosperity. This is the wages of relatively low-income, low-skilled workers in different countries. So you see Japan catching up towards the United States. It's a remarkable success of economic development, I would say, even though it's often no longer the focus of the economic development studies. China and India obviously have had very different experiences. The real wages are substantially lower. And this is, again, the structure of the global economy that we face today. So what is AI going to do? So it clearly takes over certain kind of tasks that humans are good at and that humans like doing. So there are a lot of studies about precisely who will be affected. I'll come to that in a moment. But the key thing to remember is, and to be quite honest with ourselves, this is automation. This is replacing people with machines. Now, we've been replacing people with machines for many, many hundreds of years, and the Industrial Revolution is about replacing physical labor with machines, absolutely. Here we're replacing mental labor or calculation or thinking, whatever you want to call it, with machines. So automation can be positive. Automation can boost productivity, but automation also displaces people. What you need to harness the benefits is new task creation. You need humans to do new things, and those new tasks need to require expertise, because if they can be done by anybody just hired off the street, you're not going to get, I'm sorry, you and I are not going to get paid any kind of premium wage. So are we creating new tasks, and who can benefit from those new tasks? That's the question. So we can go in more detail, and you can read the underlying papers of what we know about what these algorithms can do, the ways in which they can complement some people, and the way in which they displace other people. We have some good studies on that, but as I said, there's room for a lot more. There's also studies about the amount of change in the labor market that will be required as people move from existing jobs to new jobs. And there's concern about the amount of labor turnover that will be needed. I think in the US, actually, we look relatively good on these metrics. Other parts of the world, such as Europe, seem likely that they're going to struggle more. And there is this documented concern, this is not our work, but I want to flag it for you, that some people, women and younger workers, are particularly currently engaged in jobs that will be more likely to be taken over by algorithms. Now, doesn't mean that those people will lose net, because they may also be able to take advantage of the new opportunities and move into those new tasks. But it does mean, I think, that we should be very mindful of what we teach in universities, of what we encourage people to learn, of the kinds of skills that we believe will serve us well through working lifetimes, because the pressure is already considerable. Now, if the big positive growth projections are correct, then there is obviously less to worry about, because the pie gets a lot bigger and you can share that pie with people. You can compensate people who lose their jobs and so on. So there's a set of studies that look at these effects. And I think that if you take them as a whole, and if you evaluate them, and we've got some work by my colleague Daron Acemoglu that's done exactly that, the productivity gains, headline productivity gains, will not be significant. So productivity will continue to grow in the United States. AI will be part of what gives you that productivity growth, but it's not going to dramatically change that trend line. If I'm wrong, that's great. You can forget all about this talk. You can be happy the rest of your lives. You'll have the cornucopia that you dreamt of. But it seems, unfortunately, rather unlikely, at least on the basis of what we see currently. And at the same time, we must continue to deal with this big difference in wages across different kinds of economies, different kinds of political systems. And we don't know exactly what trading system we're going to be living under. But I think that this is going to be a very important context for thinking about who gains and who loses from AI globally and within the United States. Now, in conclusion, because Sebastian will be stepping up in just a moment for us to continue the conversation, there are plenty of policies that could be pursued that would push AI towards what we call a pro-worker version. So pro-worker version would be AI that complements the skills and the abilities of workers with who didn't go to four-year college, for example. I think this is entirely feasible. It's not the and we have some perfectly fine conversations with people in the tech sector, people who are inventing technology about this. I wouldn't say that they're dramatically opposed to this proposition. It's not their current focus. It's not where the money is. It's not where the market is. And this is also, I think, fairly obviously not the current focus of policy. I think policy, the desire to help people who are left behind is admirable. I think many people have been left behind in this economy. Many regions of this economy have been very hard hit by automation and globalization. Many people who previously had middle-class jobs have been very hard hit by exactly these phenomena and by the decline of trade unions. But putting up trade barriers and trying to close off your economy is not likely to reverse those trends or really help people. I mean, the big issue is what comes next, what gets invented, and who gets a good job as a result of those inventions. And that's something that I believe we can all affect and influence through our advocacy, through our inventions, through our engagement with these issues. And that's what I encourage everybody to do, particularly because I think the democracy is really in pretty severe danger. So the book is Power and Progress. It's available in about 20 languages. Happy to share copies with you afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, for a great talk. This is a copy of the book. For those of you who don't have it yet, get it. It's a fascinating piece. Thank you for coming, Simon. I have a lot of questions to ask. Until what time do you have? We have one. Okay, great. So
not until Cory Booker stops talking in the Senate.
Yeah. Question for the conversation.
Okay. Okay. So let me start by asking you some personal questions, if I can. I've known Simon for a very long time. We have worked together, and but I did go through some of his interviews on YouTube to get ready for a conversation today. So you grew up in Sheffield, in England, and you come from a family that was related to the industrial sector. You said that one side of your family had a small factory, they manufactured screws, and on the other side, I think your father worked in a steel mill as an executive. Growing up in an industrial part, how did that affect your perspective and your interest in becoming an economist, and then the career that you have followed as an economist? It's very different growing up in Sheffield than growing up, say, in Vegas.
Yes, probably true. Yeah, so it was my grandfather who worked in the big steel mill, and my father's side. I mention this because my father is still alive. He's almost 89, and he watches all these videos. So we're going to make sure we get these details right. You know, I grew up in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s at a time when industrial decline was around us in the north of England, and I was, you know, concerned by the fact that so many people of my father's and mother's generations lost their jobs in these factories, and they lost them through an earlier version of this same process that we're talking about, including global competition. So that, I think, really shaped my interest in trying to understand the world and what is happening in the world, and what are the forces both beyond our control, genuinely beyond our control, but also what are the policies that we can imagine and even implement that make a difference.
Okay. So you also said, I think it was the same interview, that you thought that economics should the purpose of economics should be to devise ways of getting the world to become more prosperous and to have shared prosperity. That I was not surprised that you said that, but then you said you thought that good economics was like engineering, like building bridges and building infrastructure. Why don't you elaborate? Because I go to the econ department here or at MIT for that matter, not all the colleagues will agree with that. So what's the connection that you see between building things, and in that interview you said bridges, and economics? Why do you think that economists should have that point of view?
Okay, so what I was saying in the interview was that was what I believed when I went into economics.
Okay.
And I would say that for a long time, I didn't see economics as that. But I think today, Sebastian, I do. I think that what I find is not economists alone and not economics by itself, but economics working with other disciplines, including engineering or public health or other fields. I think we have a lot to add in terms of very practically what can be achieved. How would you put this together? What makes it robust in the face of global economic difficulties or financial crisis or what have you? And I find certainly on our campus at MIT, a lot of productive conversations with engineers who want to build things, and particularly people who want to build systems around critical minerals, for example. Well, thinking about the economics of that and thinking about where that fits in the economic system of today and tomorrow is very constructive for them and for me.
Okay. So you mentioned, I want to say on passing, you may be offended by this, but on passing, unions. We had as an early speaker in the Harberger lectures, Angus Deaton, our friend Angus. And one of the things that he said is, not at the lecture, but in his recent sort of mea culpa in the IMF finance and development, that unions have to sit at the table in deciding which direction AI will take. So it's related to what you told us here, power and how AI will affect polarization. But he says unions should sit at the table. How do you see that? How could that happen? Do you agree with that notion?
Yes, I do agree with that notion. And there are unions that feel the same way. And I think that, that there's obviously tension, and we talk about this in the book, more than in passing, by the way.
No, you're on passing here,
Yes,
presentation here.
Fine, fair.
No, the book, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you don't have a seat at the table, then your visions and aspirations are just going to be ignored. I mean, for everyone. And so if you're saying, right, who can represent workers? What is it the workers need? What is it that would really enhance job quality? What makes people safer at work? What will really increase productivity and therefore make it possible to have higher wages? I think unions have a lot to add to that.
But
Now,
so you think that unions should be strengthened, that the trend of unions having lost power in the United States has been detrimental, and that there should be a rethinking about the role of unions?
I think the decline of trade unions in the United States has definitely played a role in the decline of the middle class, because those were good. A lot of those union jobs were in manufacturing were good jobs. And I believe, in fact, you pointed out to me that President Trump called the head of the UAW to the stage today.
He gave a little 90-second speech.
And I think that speaks to this concern that many people have, legitimate concern, that those jobs are further going to fade unless some other policies are adopted. I'm not endorsing Mr. Trump's tariff policies at all.
No, we'll get to the tariffs.
Okay. So I think voice for workers is important. And I think trade unions are an important part of this. The AFL-CIO has a technology group that works on this, and we're very supportive of them. And I've talked to other specific unions where the conversation is not how do we stop this, because I think at least the union people I've talked to don't believe you can stop technology, but how can we argue for technology, push technology in a direction where it's better for the workers, better for more of the workers who keep their jobs? That's a reasonable conversation.
Okay. So let's change topics. You worked in Russia and the Ukraine. So tell us a little bit about that experience. What did you do there, and how that percolates into the current situation? I am not sure. I don't remember if you were in Russia and the Ukraine or just in the Ukraine?
Yeah, in the early 1990s, I worked in the various parts of the post-communist world. I worked for the first solidarity government in Poland. I worked in Ukraine from before independence, actually. So in 1991, before the Soviet Union fell apart. And I also worked in Russia at various points during the 1990s I ran a management education center in St. Petersburg for Duke University, and I worked for various projects in Moscow in the second half of the 1990s. My perspective on the war is that the full-scale invasion by Mr. Putin is absolutely horrendous violation of many things, including agreements that Russia and even Mr. Putin had signed previously. And I think that Ukraine will keep fighting. And I think that ultimately Ukraine will survive, but it's going to be extremely nasty. There are better ways to end the war, including some economic proposals that are out there that I've supported quite strongly.
So can you talk about that? What kind of economic proposals have you made? And
Well,
to end the war? I mean,
Yeah,
that
so-
are related to ending
so
the war.
the primary export of Russia is oil, some gas, some petroleum products, but it mostly sells crude oil at this point. Most of that crude oil is carried by tanker, and all of these tankers are tracked. So it's public commercial knowledge exactly how much Russian oil is on a ship anywhere in the world. You follow the ships by satellite, among other forms. You can't hide if you transship it to another ship. That can also be tracked. And so we know exactly who buys the oil from Russia. And the proposal under the Biden administration was to put a cap on the price of oil and to lower that progressively. And Russia needs this revenue. This is how they buy their imports, including electronics and weapon systems from other countries, such as China, not only China. The current proposal, actually, which proposal of the week, which has been a little bit lost in the other noise, comes from Senator Lindsey Graham and 49 co-sponsors in the Senate, Democrats and Republicans, who are arguing for, they call it secondary tariffs, but I think secondary sanctions would work just as well. And in effectively other ways to tax those Russian oil exports and reduce the revenue that Putin receives if the president determines that the Russians are not cooperating with the peace process, which they're not. So I think that there are ways to go at the Russian oil revenue without disrupting the world oil market, because that would be problematic in terms of spillover consequences. And the good news is steps have been taken in the right direction. The bad news is too little and not yet enough.
Okay, so let's talk about today, the tariffs. So I'm not going to ask you whether you agree, because you already said you don't, and most economists don't. But I want to put this in a broader context. Many economists, including Joe Stiglitz, Paul Krugman, Danny Roderick, have become very critical of globalization and have argued that we need industrial policy. And usually industrial policy tends to have a component of tariffs. So why don't you tell us what you think from that perspective, globalization, industrial policy, and how that contradicts, whatever you think about that, what was announced today, which is not industrial policy, is like mega super absurd tariff levels, right?
Yes, but I think that the main problem with what was announced today, Sebastian, is we don't really know what was announced. Are these new permanent levels?
397 pages has the report.
I wish I didn't have to.
I read 97 already.
Well, you're way ahead of me. You're way ahead of me as usual, Sebastian. Look, I think the uncertainty about, are these new levels? Is it going to get even higher? Are they going to be negotiated away? We don't know. And that's a big problem for the real economy, because how can you make any business decision that involves anything imported if you don't know what the price is going to be? So I think that's problem number one. Problem number two is that as I said, and I emphasize, the increasing polarization in this country is very much about the pressure that's been on the middle, which is partly automation. That's what we emphasize in this book, but it's also globalization. But to say we'll put up massive tariff barriers and the jobs will magically come back, I think that is an illusion. I don't think that's what's going to happen. It wouldn't surprise me if we get some increase in manufacturing output in this country. I think that's been in the works for a while, but I think it'll be highly automated. You won't get a lot of jobs from that. The proposal that John Gruber and I put forward in 2019, a book called Jumpstarting America, was to double down on what we're really good at in the United States, which is this kind of enterprise: universities, science, invention, commercialization. Put more money into NIH, ramp up biomedicine. Yeah, exactly. We're going in the wrong direction, right? The Human Genome Project cost the government, private venture capital didn't want to take it on because there were too many spillovers, too much uncertainty. Cost the government a couple of tens of billions of dollars. It's an industry that supports 300,000 people now, making really good money. Oh, and they also provided you with COVID-19 vaccines. You may not like the vaccines. I buy them all. Okay, so you can make up your own mind. But so I think investing in the future of science and technology and commercializing it, we're 330 some million people in a world of 8 billion that has a lot of problems. We're inventors. We find solutions, Sebastian. That's my answer to the globalization thing, which is invent more, invent better, move up the value.
So what would you tell the people who say that Brazil should have industrial policy, or Indonesia and should have an active policy to using tariffs to increase manufacturing and so on and so forth? Are you? That's a.
Did you write the definitive paper on this in 1983, Sebastian? I mean, I think it's a trick question, right? Because the history of Latin America is full of brilliant, brilliant economists.
But it's sort of coming back. No, you.
Yes. Yeah. Look, I think that it's very much coming back, and I think it's very dangerous, and I think it's going to hurt us, and I think it's going to hurt other economies, because when countries have tried import substitution, or
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work, right?
So I have a last question before I ask the public for questions. So, but going back to your AI discussion, I forget who, maybe it was Altman as well, who said you really to take advantage of what the LLMs offer, you really need to know how to communicate to them, with them, and you have to know how to prompt them. And I started thinking about that. And I think that maybe that is, you will learn how to do that unless you're doing coding with very solid liberal arts degrees. And that means that the humanities and the literature and history and going back to basics in college will be the way forward, because that you need to have a fruitful conversation with ChatGPT. Do you think that there is that sort of a collateral effect or spillover, that really the humanities will revive because we need them to have a conversation with ChatGPT?
Okay, I think the humanities are going to do well. I don't think it's in order to have a conversation with ChatGPT. I think it's in order to talk to humans and to communicate with humans and persuade.
But we don't talk to humans anymore.
Well, all right, we need to get back on track with that. So one of my friends who runs a lab at MIT employs some computer science grads and some non-computer science people who are humanities philosophy type people. And he says the productivity of the non-computer science people has gone up relative to the computer science people, because you don't have to do coding. You don't have to know how to do coding anymore. Right. You can have AI help you do the coding. And so I think it does change the relative value of certain kinds of skills. And I think it does tilt towards being able to have conversations, being able to understand how other people are feeling, being able to find persuasive arguments, or work in a team. And that's what we emphasize in our MBA program.
So I said that was my last question, but I was lying. My last question, I am intrigued by the fact that you guys think that there will be no effect on total productivity growth. There was a quote from Bob Solow, the famous quote, "We can see computers," which is said in the late 70s, right?
Yeah.
We can see computers everywhere except in the productivity data. That's what Bob Solow said. I'm surprised. You really think that there will be no effect on productivity? So when you say this is what I heard you say. The trend for productivity will continue to be the same, but now it will be driven in large part by AI. If that is the case, it has to crowd out something that was producing that trend before. What is it? I mean, I find it hard to believe that there will be no change in productivity. I think you're being on the pessimistic side on that regard.
Possibly. I mean, we are trying to be careful and ground it in the data. And so the improvement of the capabilities of this technology is remarkable, and it's come very fast. And a lot of my very expert friends are surprised by that. But if you look at what's actually happening in the workplace and look at what the technology can actually do and look at try to measure that impact and look at the tasks that can be taken over, this is what Daron's paper is about, for example, it's not yet persuasive that it moves the needle macroeconomically. The quote I have, the other quote I have with the Solow quote is from John Williams, who's the president of the New York Fed, very sensible person. And his line, which I like a lot, is that it does a lot. You change many things, but in aggregate, it just delivers roughly the same productivity gain. We'll see. I mean, again, if I'm wrong, it's not the worst thing. I can spend more time on the beach.
Okay, so just for my greatest use of AI is for translation, and if you are working with archives that are in a different language, and now with your iPhone you take a photo, even if it's handwritten and you cannot decipher what is written there, AI will decipher it and B, translated for you in 3 seconds. It is truly amazing. So let's open up to the public for questions. So raise your hands don't be shy, but so that they can see you and bring the mic. Yeah, okay. So let's start at the back there, yeah.
Hi, thank you, Simon. Really appreciate that. I have a couple questions, and the first is regarding the inequality that you talked about as a result of AI, and the second is about the skills that will emerge through AI. So the first one, you talked about how it will kind of exacerbate that inequality. But I think the hypothesis is that the democratization of tools like AI, similar to the internet and other tools, will kind of be the tide that lifts all boats, in the sense that the average person can get an expansive education very quickly. They can complete tasks much more efficiently. You do that at scale, and in aggregate, it kind of drives everything up. So if that's the hypothesis, what do you find incorrect about that? And I look at some comparisons. Like I said, you brought up the industrial changes. You talked about machinery, the automotive industry. I feel like those are fundamentally different mental models compared to the digital internet information age, in the sense that on the industrial side, it's about how can you contribute to building a car, contributing to a corporation's productivity, whereas with the internet, with digital tools, it's individual productivity. You can start a business, you can launch your own venture, you can do all those things in a much more self-sufficient capacity. So how do you make that comparison compared to like the automotive industrial side? You also look at India, how they've jumped past desktop and gone into mobile. Those are leapfrogs in productivity. So how do you square all of that? And finally, the second thing is when it comes to, okay, just one. Okay.
So we're gonna accumulate 3 questions and then ask Simon to answer. So over here.
Yeah, I think that was 3 questions, but anyway.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Simon to elaborate on the issue that women will be particularly squeezed. And if you were leading a women's rights organization, for instance, what might you advocate to not have that happen?
So I'll take advantage of being the moderator. When you said that, I was also surprised, and then I thought, maybe it's the job rather than the gender. Maybe it's the childcare. When I take my grandkids to childcare, still there are mostly women working there. And I don't know how they can use AI. So that's part of the question. Let's get one more question over here. And then Simon will answer, then we'll get another round.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm very curious, just based on your expertise, how would creativity look different given we have a new tool called AI right now?
Okay, Simon.
Yes, I can answer the first and second question, the answer partially similar overlaps. So there's no question that if AI can reduce barriers to acquiring knowledge, it could be transformational in many parts of the world. So the formal schooling doesn't work well for everybody, and doesn't work well in many parts of this country. It's very bad in other parts of the world. If somebody wants to work on a breakthrough application, world-changing application, I would say education through AI is the way to go. And that could be really transformational for many people, particularly lower income people. The problem is, of course, and we talk about this in the book, that this is what we thought, as you said, the internet was going to do. This is what we thought PCs were going to do. Remember, the hacking culture of the 1960s and into the 70s was anti-IBM, anti-corporate, put the technology and the tools in the hands of people, decentralize innovation. So we've had that for 40 years, and yet we've had this growing divergence of real wages. So it's not, unfortunately, clear that you're going to get anything different from the next step in digital transformation or digital technology than what you got over the previous 40 years. And the irony is, yes, exactly, that in the automobile industry, you had to work for Ford or GM or one of the other big companies, and you were a small cog in a big corporate machine, and yet real wages did rise, right? That was the period when we had the middle class growth. But we had unions, and now we're in a world where we don't have unions because the structure of private employment has changed dramatically, and that's got to be recognized and called out. And the technology alone is not gonna change this. As for women, so the issue for women is exactly the jobs that they have. And if you look at, so this comes from people who look at the kinds of tasks held with different kinds of people and what tasks the algorithms are relatively good at. And it's actually the clerical work that's relatively exposed. Clerical work with some routine element, that's the most exposed to algorithmic takeover. And women do more of that. Young people do more of that. A lot of times it's career ladders. A lot of times these are the jobs that people can find at a certain stage of their career, for example, at the beginning of their careers. In terms of the advocacy for women's rights, I think that's a really interesting question. And it has to be, if you take our framework seriously and the evidence that we focus on, it's about what kind of tasks people want to do, what kind of tasks require expertise, what are those tasks going to be that are going to be in demand and well remunerated in the future, and helping women recognize that early and believe in those and identify with them, and then acquire the skills and enough of the familiarity with the technology to be able to benefit from that. So where are we going in terms of new task creation? It's a very hard question to know, right? But if you have enough people plugged in and discussing that, I think you might make some progress. What is creativity going to look like? I have no idea. And that's, you know, obviously a fascinating and fun part of this process. I think the expansion of what we can invent is a great thing and a very positive thing. But I think we also need to consider the consequences for people who are not at the forefront and people who are being displaced. And you know, are we creating well-remunerated work for other people? I think that should become, I think it will become a bigger topic for this kind of discussion.
So we're going to have another round. Oh, no, look at this. But let me ask the first question of the second round. The one word that you did not mention, or area, is the environment. If I understand, these LLM models use an enormous amount of energy. And there is this whole issue that where is it going to come from, and so on and so forth. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that. So here, or I think we have another mic over there.
Yes, and I think there is another word that you did not mention, that's culture. And I'm reminded of Sam Huntington's famous quote. He said that in the 1960s, South Korea and Ghana had the same per capita GDP, and several decades later, there's a huge divergence. And he argued that culture has a lot to do with it. So in the context of your work, what role do you see for culture?
Okay, we have another question there. Yes.
This one first.
Hi, thank you so much for the lecture. What does the frontier of possible expansion in jobs that AI is going to create look like, if that can be forecasted at all? And if that expansion is not going to successfully outstrip the automation of jobs, what does the discussion look like on competitive alternate theories for how labor accords with wages, since things like UBI are constantly questioned as being quote unquote free money, which is obviously not the case. But that's my question. Thanks.
Okay, why don't we ask one more over there? While the mic is going there, you didn't mention Europe. Mario Draghi.
You only gave me 20 minutes.
That's
Stefan.
okay. That's okay. You didn't mention it. It's not that you ignore it. Mario Draghi, in his reports for the EU, one of the things that impressed me is that he said of the 10 largest and most efficient LLM models, 8 are in the US and 2 are in China. Basically, he was saying not one is in Europe. How do you see Europe in this whole development of the AI world going forward? And let's get a question there at the end.
Thank you. Well, you've sort of partly anticipated my question, but because the talk began by you indicating the sort of path-dependent nature of technology, and that it depends on the sort of decisions various actors make. But I think we sort of looked at domestic actors, so states and unions. But what about sort of international organizations? Is there a scope for multilateral sort of international actors to have any relevance in the future of AI, or are they sort of not serious actors anymore?
Okay, so I think I'll take these questions in reverse order. The international organizations are not players in this space. The allocation of capital, according to the best estimates we have, which don't include China because we don't really have accurate information, so this is ex-China, it's 97% of the capital going into AI investments right now is 95% in the United States, 3% in Europe, and 2% in the rest of the world. It's incredibly skewed, much more skewed than other industrial technology transformation. Even computers, even the PCs, we had more, and even I think at the internet we had more action in Europe. Now, Europe's obviously got a number of other geopolitical problems that are rather in their face right now, and I think there's tremendous opportunities for them. I don't think they can outcompete the US in the foundation model level of AI. I think it's too late for that, but I think there's many other places that they could invest, develop technology, commercialize it. I think Draghi was another MIT graduate. Draghi was another Redomer student. Draghi is absolutely spot on, and it remains to be seen whether or not the Europeans get that and how quickly. So I'm not writing Europe off at all, but there's no question they fell behind in a big way here. So the decisions are being made by the US tech sector, and the US tech sector has got, well, you know how much political voice they have and where they get to sit at the inauguration and so on. So this is
today. One of the things that impressed me, I don't know how many of you saw the actual video of how Trump called Independence Day?
Liberation Day.
But he didn't recognize him. So either if he was not there or if he was there, he was recognized. So
I spent part of the 1980s also studying the Soviet Union, and I went to seminars where we would discuss who sat next to whom on the podium. Yes, yes. So we're a little bit slipping into criminology here. Yeah, on the jobs question, if I understand correctly, I think the problem is exactly that we can see a lot of the automation. We can see it very concretely. And when you talk to corporate executives, I mean, these are not evil people. They're people who have a job, and and their job is to make money for their shoulders. They can show you and tell you exactly how the amount of time needed to handle a customer call is falling from 8 minutes to 6 minutes because the AI now does the transcription. It does it with less error, and it actually discloses some of them. Absolutely confident in this. It records less confidential information that's not supposed to be written down than a human does when the human takes the record. So we can see the automation, that we don't yet see the tasks, and that's what we're pushing for, and that's what we're encouraging people to look for and to research and to try to develop. More new tasks, more channeling the creativity to do things humans haven't done before. That's going to be that's what you need for the labor market. Otherwise, we're exactly trying to find some basic income for people, but there won't. If productivity goes up a lot, then we can afford basic income, right? If it goes up enough. But I don't think it's going to go by that much. Therefore, basic income is not appealing to me as a strategy. I also would suggest that politically, having a set of people who are on basic income is very hard to sustain. Kurt Vonnegut wrote a brilliant book about this. I think he wrote it at the end of the 1940s called Play a Piano, where there's a society where there's some very highly educated engineers who run everything and everyone else does make work and is low status and pretty unhappy. And I tell all my audiences, if you're only going to read one book after you heard me speak, you should read my book. It's called Power and Progress. But if you're going to read two books, Kurt Vonnegut's Play a Piano, brilliant. I mean, he wasn't right about, he was very caught up in and studied or thinking about cybernetics, which was what one thing that one name that AI tech developments had, when automation had previously. He wasn't right about what happened in that part of the industrial age, but I think he's quite prescient in terms of what he was worried about going forward. Culture. So my wife's family's from Korea. My father-in-law, who sadly passed away, sent me a one-line email when I became chief economist of the IMF. He said, "Please be nice to Korea." So I was. And I've thought a lot about exactly this comparison, the Korea-Ghana comparison. You know, and the fact of the matter is that some people, I think they might have been from the World Bank, but Sebastian might say they were from the IMF, in the 1950s looked at Korea and Ghana and other countries and said, you know, Korea's not going to go anywhere because they have a culture problem, right? And I think culture is positive and has played a constructive role in what happened in South Korea, but it was much more about building resilient, good rule of law, ending corruption, actually building a pretty resilient democracy. That I think played a bigger role. But I'm happy to give an assist to culture. That's a basketball term, right? We do that, yes. And on the environment, yes, sure, you're right about energy. The advocates for the sector say energy use will come down, the models will get better at being efficient. But I think one way that some people bet on the future of AI is by buying up power generation, right? Particularly if you think the crypto world is going to go boom or pop or one of those noises, there's going to be a lot of pressure on electricity prices, I think, Sebastian. That's a place where we're going to see some real friction going forward.
So you rightly say that they should read your book. Can you talk about one of your other books, the one about burning White House? That was the American-Canadian one?
So the book is called White House Burning. It's a reference to something that happened in the War of 1812, which, just the great way American history works, was actually in the summer of 1814. And that was a war between the United States and Britain. And the British broke.
Canada.
Well, the Canadians were on the side of the British or vice versa. And the Americans suffered severe reverses because
Canada can win wars.
Canada can win every war if it wants. Or they could, look, if they want to become the 51st state or 51, 2, and 3 and have 6 senators, the good people of Canada make the people of Massachusetts look left wing, look right wing, okay? Because they have socialized medicine, good education. Anyway, but the point of that book was about undermining U.S. fiscal capacity, because the U.S. military was woefully underprepared because there was no they'd overspent basically relative to their revenues. And so the point of that book was to, this was in the aftermath of the financial crisis, to rebuild finances and to put the debt, US government debt, onto a sustainable basis, which I thought then was entirely feasible and could be done without a great deal of hardship, but unfortunately it wasn't done. And so we're in a place now where further tax cuts, for example, will make our fiscal position more precarious and I think undermine our national security, honestly.
We have, so why don't you talk to us about the debts? You just mentioned the debt. So I teach a course, probably similar to what they teach at Sloan. And I showed them debt to GDP in the US, and it was 30% for a long time. And then comes Reagan, and it goes to 60% of GDP, and it stays constant for a long time. And then comes Lehman Brothers, and it goes to 90. And Ken Wallow says that the world's going to end. And then went to 100, and then to 120. The world did not end. Is there a limit? Can we go further up? Can we? Why can't we be like Japan?
Okay,
Japan has to 60% of GDP, right?
the question is, when will the world end? One thing you learn, one thing they tell you actually the first day of being chief economist of the IMF is never predict a number and an event, precise date in the same prediction. So the world will end, but I won't tell you when, Sebastian. Look, as you know better than anyone, in fact, literally better than anyone in the world, I think, is we don't know what is the carrying capacity of the world relative to US debt. If we push it higher, we might get away with it. Rates might stay lower, although the phase of the 2010s when people were arguing we could issue unlimited debt and rates will never rise, that phase is over. Thank goodness, right? That was a very unreal and I think dangerous phase. So now the point is clear in people's minds that the bond vigilantes can come for anyone. They came for Liz Truss. I was asked by the BBC to comment on Liz Truss's government a couple of years ago. And I was late on a Friday and I thought, I have a lot of bad things to say about her fiscal policy, but you know what? I'm really tired and busy with other things. I'll wait until Monday. And next week, exactly, she was gone. So always take the call from the BBC. Don't hesitate to speak out about the dangers of irresponsible fiscal policy. My lesson learned there. But I think it's fascinating. I mean, if we're legalizing and encouraging cryptocurrency, Sebastian, what does that do for demand for the US dollar as a reserve currency? Now, it might go down because there might be more substitutes, but it might also create much more instability in the world, and therefore demand for the US dollar goes up. So I think it's imponderable and unanswerable, but my recommendation is to be careful. The debt in your historical description, which was right, of course, but there were other big spikes historically, particularly when wars occurred, and World War II, of course, was a massive spike in debt. And the Alexander Hamilton philosophy was run up the debt in a crisis or in a war or in a financial crisis. I think we've been okay with that. But then bring it back down as a percent of GDP, allow the economy to grow while you stabilize the debt. And I think that is exactly what we should be pursuing in the United States. And that's not, unfortunately, what both Democrats and Republicans have preferred to do.
You're worried about Germany? Why am I asking about Germany now and not before? It's because Germany just relaxed its constitutional constraint on how much debt they could have. So they were constrained at 60%, and they just relaxed it. So Germany is going through a difficult time, I think.
Okay.
What's your view? I mean, what a great country, right?
So when you ask me that question, I tend to think historically. And look, the biggest success in the world of the past 70, 80 years is that Western Europe no longer fights itself. Okay, for hundreds of years, they fought devastating wars that had global impact. And actually, the US tried to stay out of them and got sucked into a couple of them. And then there was this post-war moment where the US actually brought everyone together and said, you know what, we're not going back to empires. We're not going back to that same sort of competition for territory. We're going to run this thing we're going to ends up being called the Bretton Woods system, with a much more open trading set of relationships and a Pax Americana to back it up. And I am very worried about Europe writ large. I'm very worried about Russia, Ukraine, and what happens there and what happens coming from the East. I'm not worried about Germany becoming overly militarized and overly aggressive, but I am worried about whether the Europeans can reignite economic growth and deliver shared prosperity. And the developments in France this week, including with Marine Le Pen being excluded from the presidency, are one further indication of how close some of these well-established democracies are to falling into a different kind of equilibrium, which, I mean, I hope everyone at UCLA knows among the many things Sebastian's famous for is writing about Latin American populism in the 1980s in a way that was not only extremely helpful to me when I was learning economics, and extremely insightful for understanding Latin America in the 1980s and for what happened afterwards as they tried to grow out of it. But many other countries have fallen into versions of populism, I think we can agree subsequently, including potentially, we'll see, the United States, right? And Europe, I think, faces some of the same dangers. I firmly believe that building strong economic political institutions is what you need for sustained economic prosperity and for vibrant democracy. But if you don't, even if you have those good institutions and you don't deliver on shared prosperity, if you leave people behind and those people get angry, then you're dealing with trouble. And maybe you left them behind because of the way globalization was managed. Maybe you left them behind because technology did some things that, you didn't even understand at the time and it just overtook you. Or maybe you put the boot in and you gave the workers a hard time and thought you'd get away with it. Whatever the combination of, whatever the history you want to tell, leaving people behind, even in these, by historical standards, rich democracies, is a very bad idea for everything, for anything you care about, for social stability, for peace in the world, for living as we've all lived in a world substantially without interstate massive conflict of the kind that it experienced for 100 years previously. So I really hope we're not going back to something like that.
So you open up by saying there are two camps, the optimists and the pessimists. Where are you?
So I testified at the height of the financial crisis to a House committee, and on my left was Joe Stiglitz, and on my right was Tom Hoenig. Joe Stiglitz is obviously the dean of left-wing economists everywhere, always, and Tom Hoenig was then president of the Kansas City Fed and maybe he wasn't a registered Republican, but he was certainly a right-leaning independent. And I was right smack in the middle, Sebastian. You'll always find me right in the middle. I'm right in the middle of the former chief economist of the IMF. Come on, the IMF has a test. IMF, you don't get to be chief economist of the IMF if you're extremely left or extremely right. There's a test for moderation and being reasonable, and I did really well on that test.
Okay, on that note, thank you so much, Simon. Thank you.